My hand slammed down on the marble countertop so hard it rattled every spice jar in the cabinet. The text glared at me from the cracked screen. "You won't be joining us. My wife prefers to keep it just for her family after I paid for the whole vacation. You've done your part by paying." My breath caught in my throat, and the air around me seemed to shudder. I could still feel the warm imprint of the phone against my palm moments before, but now it was ice-cold judgment. A wooden spoon lay abandoned in the sink, its dishwater reflection mirroring my fracturing heart. I'd spent 3 years building this trip with whispered prayers and quiet sacrifices, and in one flick of the thumb, I'd been erased. My knuckles whitened as I gripped the edge of the counter, knifing through the shock to the raw pounding pulse of my own anger. When the phone buzzed at 11:02 p.m., the kitchen was pitch black except for the refrigerator's hum and the pale moonlight slanting through the blinds. My reading glasses dangled at the end of my nose, and I had just finished labeling little, zip-pierced bags of sunscreen for each grandchild, pink, green, yellow one for Olivia, one for Mason. I tucked the last gift tag into place when that buzz sliced through the quiet, and I knew instantly it wasn't a cheerful goodnight from my daughter or a reminder from the bank. I lifted the phone. The blue light washed over my face as though I'd peered into an open wound. My son's name stared back at me in the notification banner. I tapped it, and there it was, the text that shattered everything. I tried to swallow, but my throat clenched. The words read more like a verdict than a message. "You've paid, you've done your part, now step aside." I set the phone on the counter and stared at the wall at the faded photograph of my honeymoon, James smiling, sunburned and carefree, holding my hand across a stretch of white sand. My heart pounded so loudly I thought the neighbors might hear it through the walls. My body felt hollow, as though the careful plans and whispered dreams of 3 years had been scooped out like soft ice cream in the midday sun. I picked up the phone again, fingertips trembling, and reread the text word by word. His words felt surgical cold, precise, and designed for maximum pain. "You won't be joining us. My wife prefers to keep it just for her family after I paid for the whole vacation. You've done your part by paying." No apology, no hint of hesitation or remorse. Just the finality of a locked door clicking behind me. I slipped into a chair, the one I'd patched with fabric scraps years ago, and cradled the phone against my chest. I closed my eyes, remembering how Nathan used to spring up on Mother's Day, pink tulips in hand, telling me I was his hero. I could still see that second-grade drawing me in a cape. "My mom saves the day," scrawled underneath in childish letters. My chest ached with nostalgia and betrayal, mingling into a fierce ache behind my eyes. In that moment, the kitchen table, with its bags of sunscreen, my grandmother knickknacks, and the silent hum of the refrigerator all blurred into insignificance. The only thing that mattered was the text's promise that I was no longer welcome. All those hours researching villas with step-free walkways for Tanya's mother, all the late nights tutoring English lessons in my pajamas, every $10 bill tucked into envelopes I called my dream jar gone. I shook my head as if to dislodge the memory of my own sacrifices. How many nights had I skipped my favorite tea to tuck $5 into those envelopes? How many cold showers did my joints endure so that my travel fund could swell by another $10? Each little sacrifice had felt like an offering to love, to family, to memory. And yet here it was, offered back to me as an insult. I glanced at the duffel bag at my feet, the one I'd packed with sundresses with a lavender candle to honor James, with matches in a tiny box stamped lavender, his favorite scent. I let my fingers brush over the coarse fabric of that bag and the smooth surface of the candle box. The tactile comfort was fleeting. Shame washed over me before anger could even settle in. I felt foolish, as though the world had caught me in a moment of naivete. And now I was left standing in the spotlight with no stage to perform on. I wanted to call Nathan to type back a desperate plea, but "Mom, please, yet." Pride kept my fingers frozen above the keyboard. How could I beg for a place I'd already paid for? Instead, I rose and paced the narrow path between counter and table. My slippers shuffled across cool tile as I replayed every slight I'd noticed over the past months, the way Tanya corrected me in front of the kids, the subtle eye roll when I shared honeymoon stories, the holidays hosted at her mother's without so much as a "Mom, you're welcome." Each memory was a puzzle piece that now clicked into place, revealing the whole picture of exclusion. I closed my eyes and inhaled deeply, tasting the faint citrus of the dish soap still on my hands. The silence around me felt both oppressive and clarifying, no more white noise to numb the sting. I knelt opening the old wooden cabinet beneath the sink and pulled out the mason jar I'd called my dream jar. It rattled with bills and coins, each one a testament to my quiet endurance. I placed the jar on the table, then returned to the counter and reached for my phone again. My thumb hovered over the screen. In less than a second, I could halt every pending charge: villa flights, airport transfers, luau tickets, snorkeling lessons, breakfast baskets. No more ghost payments to a trip that spat on my love. I steadied my breath. The refrigerator hummed, the only witness to my decision. I tapped freeze account. A confirmation popped up. "Are you sure you want to pause all linked transactions?" My finger pressed. Yes, then confirm. The screen blinked, then faded to black. Silence returned, but it felt different now, less suffocating, more resolute. In one deliberate act, I reclaimed the dream they'd tried to steal. I'd pay for a trip, yes, but this time it would be mine to define. I tucked the phone back into my pocket and touched the edge of the jar. A soft determination warmed me. I'd build a new journey from these shards of sorrow. The night stretched on, but the shadow in my heart had lifted just enough for me to see a path forward. I remember the day I first slipped a crisp $5 bill into that mason jar tucked behind the coffee mugs. It was a chilly autumn evening, October 6, 2022, when I canceled my cable service rather than pay the monthly fee. I closed the confirmation screen, scissors in hand, from cutting the last coupon for my favorite tea bags, and stared at the screen's blank space. My hand drifted to the drawer where I kept the little jars of change, and I fished out a bill, folded it twice, and placed it inside. The jar clinked like a tiny bell of hope. At first, the savings felt like a game. I sold off my old cedar chest at a yard sale, $60, to someone who thought it would be perfect for their beach cottage. I wrapped the cash in a napkin and tucked it into the dream jar. Then I listed my grandmother's heirloom china for a fraction of its worth. Some antique dealer in the next town over took the lot for $90 flat. Guilt tugged at me, but that night I lay awake imagining grandchildren chasing waves, imagining them squealing with delight as they dug holes and chased hermit crabs. The jar's clink became a lullaby. When the jar brimmed beyond half full, I realized I needed more drastic measures. So I sold my worn sectional sofa, handcrafted miles of stories stitched into its seams, to a young couple expecting their first child, $800. I felt a pang as they hauled it into their moving van, but I knew that comfort could come in so many ways. I saved the entire sum, tucked it into an envelope labeled travel fund, and placed it next to the jar. My days at the textile factory didn't change. I still punched in at 6:55 a.m., shoulders hunched over the humming sewing machine, needles dancing through denim and silk alike. My back protested with every stitch, my fingertips numb from the constant pressure. I rehearsed my savings plan in my mind while counting stitches, 10 stitches for $1, 50 stitches for $5. In the roar of the factory, it became my secret rhythm. Then came the nocturnal tutoring sessions for ESL students around the globe. My old laptop screen, scratched from years of use, carried me through midnight classes with eager learners in South Korea and Brazil. I taught them present tenses and prepositions, and every time I clicked submit payment, $15 or $20 slid into my account and then straight into that jar. I'd chide myself for the smallness of it, but nights when my joints screamed and I wished for sleep, I remembered James's sunburned grin. I whispered to the empty room, "This one's for you, my love." Each dollar felt like a love note mailed across time. On Saturdays, I walked the dusty aisles of the flea market eyeing discarded furniture and underpriced trinkets. One weekend I found a mid-century lamp, brass base, scalloped shade in a box marked free. I lugged it home, cleaned it with vinegar and baking soda, replaced the shade with a thrift store find, and sold it for $60. I poured every cent into the dream jar as I dusted off the lamp's patina. In the quiet hours before dawn, I'd sit at the kitchen table reading glasses perched on the end of my nose, the refrigerator quietly humming in solidarity, counting the bills and coins, smoothing out creases, admiring the growing bulge of that jar. I imagined it tipping over and coins spilling across the white tiles, shimmering like stars washed ashore. Those mornings, I brewed peppermint tea in my favorite chipped mug. James gave it to me on our 20th anniversary, and sipped slowly, letting the warm liquid chase away the ache in my bones. Every sacrifice tightened the knot of anticipation in my chest. I passed on lunches with friends I'm saving for something special, I'd say offering polite regret instead of spare change. They didn't know I meant it. I skipped my nightly cup of chamomile, telling myself a cold bedroom was more bearable than postponing the dream. I counted frost on the window panes and thought, this chill is temporary. Hawaii is forever. When the jar finally overflowed and I shifted its contents into 2 sturdy envelopes marked Villa and Activities, I felt a surge of both triumph and disbelief. 3 years of quiet austerity, 3 years of small refusals and big hopes had brought me to this moment. I laid the envelopes side by side, $8,500 for the villa, $3,000 for airfare transfers and car rental, $2,600 for luau tickets and snorkeling excursions, and another $1,000 for sunrise breakfasts on the lanai. I'd built a mosaic of numbers in a spreadsheet, color-coded by destination. My heart swelled at the precision of it all. Then I booked it. A beachfront villa with panoramic windows, a flat entryway for Tanya's mother's wheelchair, a fire pit ringed with Adirondack chairs. I clicked reserve, and the screen confirmed my payment method, travel fund account, Marilyn R. Monroe. My breath hitched as I read the words on the screen, my own name anchoring the dream. I pressed a hand to my heart as the confirmation email landed. Your booking is confirmed. I printed it and placed it in the fireproof lockbox alongside the fund statements. I swung the lockbox shut, feeling the weight of history, of every careful sacrifice bound within. I pictured James standing beside me on that beach, the scent of lavender drifting from my candle as I lit it at sunset, his laughter carried on the breeze. I pictured my grandchildren building sandcastles at my feet, their faces glowing with wonder, my tears of joy mingling with the salty surf. But as I closed the lockbox, a whisper of doubt tugged at the edge of my plan. Was it foolish to expect gratitude? Could love really be purchased? I shook my head, dismissing the thought like stray sand. 3 years had taught me the value of persistence. The dream wasn't just about a vacation, it was about reclaiming memories, honoring a love that death couldn't dim. So I carried on with my routine factory shifts, tutoring flea market hunts, all with renewed purpose. When the travel fund charges posted on my bank statements, I smiled at the line items, each one a silent proclamation I mattered. I had listened to the stirrings of my own heart and followed them across spreadsheets and grocery coupons and long factory hours. By the time the final warning email flashed, final payment due April 12, 2025, I had already packed the duffel, 2 sundresses swaying in the closet, a photo of James in a soft walnut frame, the lavender candle nestled among my folded clothes. Each item carried a memory, the yellow sundress from our first anniversary, the framed photo from a carnival date, the candle meant for twilight ceremonies on the sand. On that warm spring night, I sat at the table one last time before departure. The dream jar sat empty now, its green glass gleaming under the under-cabinet lights as I poured myself a cup of chamomile, my favorite tea restored. For once, I could savor it. I closed my eyes and inhaled the tea's steam-tasting victory and longing and love. I whispered into the stillness, "This is for you, James, and for me." I placed the candle, the photo, and the matches into the bag, zipped it closed, and stood. I felt the pull of possibility of memory made real, and I walked to the door, ready to carry my 3-year dream into the dawn of something beautiful. I first sensed the shift on a crisp November afternoon at Thanksgiving dinner. The house smelled of roasted turkey sage stuffing and cinnamon comforting scents I had once associated with family warmth. I had arrived early that year carrying a pumpkin pie James and I had baked together, his flour-dusted laugh still echoing in my memory. I stepped into the living room, that sacred space where family photographs usually adorned the mantel. Instead, I paused at the threshold, noticing empty frames. Tanya stood in the corner, arms folded, phone in hand. She caught my gaze and offered a tight, perfunctory smile, not the bright welcome I remembered from years past. When I began to reminisce about our honeymoon, sharing the story of James crafting a makeshift sail out of our bedsheet after he got sunburned, her eyes flicked upward, a silent, dismissive spin of an invisible wheel. It was the kind of eye roll I'd seen in high school hallways, an expression meant to shut me down without a word. The laughter in my chest stuttered to a halt as I realized I was no longer the audience she courted, but an unwelcome afterthought. I forced myself to raise my voice, telling the kids how Grandpa James had discovered a friendly sea turtle on the shore. Little Daniel's eyes lit up, and he asked if we could go to the beach again someday. My heart swelled, but the moment fractured when I glanced at Tanya's phone screen. She was swiping through photos, constructing a holiday slideshow for her nuclear unit. There was no space for Grandma, no slide with our homemade luau setup, or the photo of us dancing barefoot under string lights. I felt my throat grow tight, like my voice was trapped beneath a glass dome. A week later, at our family's annual Christmas gathering, the pattern repeated. I had returned early, bearing a knitted scarf James had once wrapped around my neck on a windy winter night. I draped it over my shoulders and settled down for the group photo, one of the few moments I still hoped to be seen. Tanya instructed Nathan's little ones to sit in the front row. Then she looked at me, smiled politely, and said, "Let's do one with just the kids, grouping them at the fireplace." I raised the scarf higher, trying to catch her eye, but she had already pivoted away, pulling Nathan's arm gently so I wouldn't interfere with her carefully curated family portrait. I stood to the side, the knitted yarn chafing at my neck like an unwelcome embrace. In that moment, I remembered what Nathan had once drawn in 2nd grade, a picture of me in a Cape Supermom protector of ants scrawled in his childlike handwriting. Back then, I felt invincible. Now I felt shrinking, as though every stitch of love I had poured into his upbringing had somehow become a stain on the fabric of their unity. At first, I told myself it was just a misunderstanding, a slip of the tongue, a careless oversight. But then came the subtle acts. Tanya started planning holidays at her mother's house, sending out group texts 15 minutes before dinner. "Hope you can make it, Mom." I received those as empty invitations, an afterthought tacked on like a footnote you only glance at when the main story feels uncomfortable. I tried to talk to Nathan about it once over coffee in his kitchen. Steam rose from our mugs as I whispered, "Sweetheart, are you okay with how things are going? I feel like I'm slipping away." He looked at me with the same gentle blue eyes I'd wiped sticky jam from the eyes that once filled me with pride. But this time he shrugged. "Mom, Tanya just wants a smaller, simpler gathering. It's nothing personal." His words were soft, but they landed like pebbles in my chest, each one creating a ripple of doubt. I forced a nod, but inside I reeled, asking myself when affection had become an entitlement over which I had no control. My days grew threaded with tension. I found myself lingering over old photo albums in the den, flipping through yellowing pages of birthdays, graduations, and Mother's Days. There were snapshots of James teaching Nathan to ride a bike of 3 generations, sitting on that lumpy couch, eating popcorn, images that once filled me with warmth, now flickered with a bittersweet glow. I gently caressed the edges of a photo where I wore a wide-brimmed sun hat, my face radiant as I watched Nathan chase a kite. My fingertips trembled as though the photograph itself was burning with an electric sadness. I began to notice other ghosts of exclusion, the way invitations arrived in email form rather than a phone call, the way texts came addressed collectively. Family gathering at Tanya's with no salutation of mom or grandma. When I replied, asking if I could bring my special ambrosia salad, I received a curt, "We've got it all covered." That was the moment I realized I'd been relegated from collaborator to spectator, my contributions mere background noise. One evening, while sorting through travel itineraries for the upcoming trip, when, by all rights, I should have still been welcome, I caught my reflection in the computer screen. There I sat packing snorkels and sunscreen, only a screenful away from plans I had funded entirely. My own image looked older, surprised, wounded somehow. I closed the laptop with a startling snap, the echo of the hinge in the silent room sounding like a verdict. For a time, I considered confronting them outright. I pictured storms, accusations hurled in their faces, the raw emotion of a mother who had given everything. But then I remembered the calm corners of my heart shaped by years of gentle resilience. I thought of James's quiet courage, the way he had brooked no drama but met life's challenges with steady nerves. I breathed in deeply, imagining lavender-scented breezes on Hawaiian shores, and I reminded myself that power need not scream, it can settle like stone and hold steadfast. Instead, I retreated to my dream jar and added the small, victorious clink of coins to a new pile of bills, reminding myself that this voyage was mine to define. I slid a fresh 20 into the jar that morning, the sound resonating in the hush of my empty kitchen. It was a promise I would not fade away like a ghost in someone else's photo. I would live fully in the plan I created with or without their presence. On the day I finally clicked freeze account, the only person I spoke to was my neighbor, Mrs. Caldwell, who leaned over our garden fence and remarked, "Your jasmine is blooming early this year." I nodded and said, "Spring surprises." The understatement felt like a triumph. Under that pale blue sky, the world continued without spectacle, and I felt my own pulse steady into something clear and true. That evening, as I placed my rubber-stamped luggage tags, Marilyn R., Monroe vacation guest, into a small stack on the table, I realized I had already begun erasing the ghosts of exclusion. The tags were not for them, they were for me. The dream of sand between my toes and candlelight on the porch was no longer a family script dictated by others, it was a story written by my own hand. I lingered in the living room, the shadows lengthening across the floorboards. The old photocopied family portraits still lined the mantel, reminders of love's fragility. I left them there as quiet testimony, but I would not allow them to chain me. I flicked off the lights and stood in darkness a moment, breathing in the hush. Ghosts will haunt the places we once cherished, but they cannot dim the light we kindle with our own resolve. I held my head high, ready to step into a chapter where presence was not measured by another's entitlement, but by my own unshakable worth. I sank into the under-cabinet glow, shivering in the hush of my own kitchen. The overhead lights felt too bright, too exposing, like I'd be caught confessing my deepest wish and my deepest shame all at once. My heart thudded so loudly I could almost hear it echo in the open cabinets. Shame crept up my throat, heavy and insistent shame, that I dared hope my family would still want me beside them on that beach. Shame that I'd believed love meant inclusion, that carrying my own weight financially and emotionally guaranteed a seat at their table. I stared down at the bundles of travel-sized sunscreen bottles lined up like an army of tiny soldiers, each one destined for a grandchild's backpack. A faint sticky film still clung to my fingertips, a souvenir from late-night rapping sessions. I pressed my fingertips to my lips, tasting my own disappointment. 2 nights ago, I'd been conjuring up pictures of turquoise waves and grandkids squealing in the sand. Now I sat in a house that felt too cavernous, too cold, haunted by the absence of my own invitation. My phone buzzed again on the counter, fresh messages from Tanya and Nathan that I dared not read. Would there be a plea in their words, an apology, or simply more cold indifference? I kept my gaze fixed on the countertop as though ignoring the phone might make it disappear. Silence stretched around me, a vast pressure that settled on my shoulders. I thought about calling Nathan, just one desperate call. I could say, "Please, Nathan, just let me come. I'll understand if it's complicated, but let me come." I pictured my trembling thumb hovering over his name in my contacts list. I pictured the mercy in his eyes when he finally said, "Mom, come join us." But I knew that wasn't going to happen. Pride, brittle and fragile as a seashell, held me silent. I remembered the day Nathan gave me that seashell, pressed between his small fingers on the beach when he was 8. "For you, Mom," he'd said, "so you can hear the ocean wherever you go." How cruelly ironic that memory felt now, as the shell in my memory offered nothing but the sound of my own racing heart. I drew in a slow breath and let it out in a shudder. My reflection in the dark window showed a woman older and wearier than the one who danced barefoot under a Hawaiian sunset years ago. The lines at the corners of my eyes, accents of laughter and sorrow, seemed to deepen in that mirrored moment. For a heartbeat, I wished I could scrub those lines away, erase the passage of time that had brought me here, erased from the picture. A gentle drip echoed from the sink, a leaky faucet that I'd meant to fix for months. As each singular drip fell, I felt a small seizure of panic, time slipping, opportunities lost. Well, would this be the last I ever kissed my grandchildren goodnight? The last time I'd watch them chase those crabs along the shore? The last time I'd smell salt air on their towels? I pressed my hand to the countertop, white knuckles trembling, clutching the edge as though it might keep me from sliding into despair. I realized I was trembling not just from the cold, but from the ache of hope deferred. Shame wrapped around me like a heavy shawl, stifling my voice before I could even form the words of a plea. The silence was insidious. It felt like a verdict, each second marking my guilt in daring to expect inclusion. My kitchen clock ticked past midnight, each tick a hammer blow, 12:01, 12:02. They boarded the plane at 12:45. I would have been in the air just then, layers of clouds beneath me, carried by this dream. Instead, I sat in my own kitchen, rattled by my own thoughts. I pressed my palms into the cool tiles, trying to steady myself. I wondered how many times in my life I had chosen silence, the moment I held back a rebuke to spare someone's feelings, the countless nights I smothered my own fears to keep the peace. Now silence threatened to swallow me whole. My gaze drifted to the small duffel bag at my feet, its zipper still half open. Inside were the 2 sundresses I hadn't worn in years, each one folded neatly, waiting for sunlit mornings. Beside them lay the framed photo of James, his laugh so easy, his head tossed back as if no burden could touch him. The lavender candle rested in a small box stamped with his favorite flower. I fingered the box, its corner soft from handling, and pressed it to my chest, as though it could shield me from this sudden loneliness. The weight of all I'd planned crashed over me in one tidal wave of clarity and shame. If I called now, what would I say? "You've hurt me deeply, but please, let me come anyway." Would my plea be met with guilt or annoyance, or would it simply be ignored? The text had taught me that lesson all too well. I couldn't bear the taste of desperation on my tongue, nor let them see me beg for a place that belonged to me as much as it did to them. I wrapped my arms around myself, swaying slightly, and felt tears press behind my eyelids. But I refused to weep. Those tears would be a confession of need, and I refused to confess that my worth hinged on their approval. No, I would not become a supplicant in my own family story. Slowly, I lowered myself to the floor, cross-legged back against the cabinet doors. I closed my eyes and breathed through the shivers, drawing strength from memory, from the countless mornings I woke before dawn to scrape together dog ear snacks for Nathan's lunch, to the evenings I stayed up sewing Halloween costumes and comfort blankets, sacrificing sleep for love. If silence had served me in raising a son who once believed I could save the world, then silence would serve me now in reclaiming my own dignity. In that muted glow, I made a promise to myself I would not let this chapter be defined by their indifference. I would not be the ghost of exclusion. I would be the author of my own next move. The whisper of the under-cabinet lights felt like a small audience to my vow, the hum of the refrigerator a subtle applause. Even the leaky faucet strip seemed to applaud in its own steady way. I reached out and touched the photo of James again. His eyes, soft, steady, full of kindness, met mine, and I drew comfort from his silent presence. I choose clarity over shame, I whispered. I choose dignity over desperation. As I said the words, a surprising warmth spread through me, melting the frost of my silence. When I finally unclasped my arms and stood, the kitchen seemed a little less cavernous. The absence of the overhead lights, once oppressive, now felt deliberate, an intimate spotlight on my resolve, rather than a glare of exposure. I slid to the counter, fingertips trailing over the grains of the wood, and let my fingers hover over my phone. I didn't need to call Nathan. My decision lay not with him, but with me. I tucked the photo and candle back into the duffel, zipped it closed, and placed the bag against the wall, as if tucking away the part of me that had wavered. There was a quiet power in that simple act, a reclamation of space in a house that had tried to shrink me. I walked to the sink, dried my hands on a towel, and felt the steady thrum of my pulse. No more would I hide in the shadows of shame. No more would I let silence define me. I turned the faucet on, letting the water run until the echo of the drip vanished. Then I flicked off the under-cabinet lights and stood in the darkness, breathing deeply. The night felt a little less cold now, filled with the promise of decisions yet to come. I stood unafraid, ready to step into whatever dawn awaited, knowing I'd face the silence and the shame and emerged unbroken. I powered on my 5-year-old laptop, its fan wheezing awake like an asthmatic in the pre-dawn hush, and waited for the screen to flicker. My heart thumped as Windows loaded the old machine, crawling through its startup routine. Finally, I double-clicked the folder on the desktop labeled Hawaii Travel Fund and watched a spreadsheet open. The balance stared back at me in bold numbers, $21,763.84. I leaned closer, my nose nearly touching the glossy screen. $21,763.84. Every canceled cable bill, every skipped cup of peppermint tea, every odd tutoring hour tucked away into this account. Each line item told its own story. 1000. Jan 5, cable refund 1500. Feb 20, ESL payment 6000. Mar 12, yard sale sofa. I scrolled through hundreds of entries, a mosaic of sacrifices. Late nights at the sewing machine, blistering my fingertips on the pedal. Dusty mornings sorting flea market finds. Weekends spent driving to tutoring gigs rather than church socials, each entry a testament to the quiet promise I made to myself. My finger hovered over the tab labeled Freeze Account. Even the words felt momentous, like a lever that could reshape reality. If I froze the account now, every pending charge from the villa's final invoice to the snorkeling excursion would stop in its tracks. They'd arrive at the airport with boarding passes clutched in sweaty hands and cards that clicked with denial. My breath caught at the thought. I closed my eyes and replayed everything that led here, how I discovered the text at 11:02 p.m., the sting of exclusion, the nights of shame by that under-cabinet glow. I remembered the way Tanya's eyes had flicked past me at every holiday gathering, how Nathan had shrugged away my questions as if I were a bothersome breeze. In that moment, freezing the account felt like the only reply they deserved. But could I really pull the plug on a dream I'd built with my own 2 hands? I pictured the villa, its wide glass doors opening onto turquoise water, the soft breeze carrying the scent of plumeria. And I felt a pang of longing. My grandchildren's laughter echoing across the sand, their tiny footprints trailing behind them. I thought of the framed photograph of James enlarged and matted in soft walnut waiting to stand guard on the dining table at sunset. Did I want to deny them that memory? Deny myself that memory? I tapped my finger against the desk, the sound sharp in the quiet. Last week, I'd printed out the detailed itinerary, day-by-day breakdowns of flights, transfers, luau dates, hula lessons, beach bonfires. I'd even color-coded it so Tanya wouldn't have to guess which days were accessible for her mother's knee. All of that, my careful planning, my whispered hopes would vanish as soon as I clicked freeze. I opened a new browser tab and navigated to the bank's help center, searching for details on the freeze feature. A guide explained that once activated, all outgoing transactions would be blocked, linked cards disabled, and no new charges could post without manual verification. There would be no heads up sent to the payees, only a terse transaction declined message on their end. That silent lesson would be felt most acutely at the airport gate, the moment when entitlement they believed guaranteed travel would shatter into embarrassed confusion. A lump formed in my throat. I thought of the voicemails Nathan would leave when the charge failed, first a panicked mom. Please, check the account, then the sharper. Why would you do this? Then perhaps a softer, desperate plea, we can still talk. I'd heard his voice trembling over the text messages already. They would scramble, retracing my every move, hoping for mercy. But mercy, I realized, was not something I owed them. I opened the spreadsheet again and scrolled to the very first deposit, a simple 500, no 5, 2022, cable saved. I clicked that cell and imagined shrinking it to a pixel any small act of sacrifice that had felt so meaningful in that moment. So many tiny acts, each one whispering, "You matter. You deserve this." Could I erase those whispers now? A soft knock at the back door startled me. I glanced over Mrs. Caldwell. My elderly neighbor stood at her fence waving. She'd come by earlier to ask about my garden, but left when she saw my anxious face. Now she stood there again, concern evident in her crooked smile. I offered a small wave, closed the spreadsheet, and minimized the browser. She nodded and returned inside her house. I returned my gaze to the freeze account button. It glowed innocently like any other link, but embodied a tremendous choice. My finger trembled as I hovered. In that instant, every memory, the laughter of nieces and nephews, the shimmer of Hawaiian sunsets, the promise to carry James's memory forward raced through my mind. I could feel the salt spray on my skin and hear the faint whisper of waves before the house swallowed all sound. Then I breathed out, slow and deliberate, and pressed down. The screen shook. A confirmation dialog blinked. "Are you sure you want to pause all linked transactions?" My finger lingered over the yes button. Another breath. When I finally clicked yes, the screen flashed the transaction locked, and a quiet success message appeared. My chest tightened. My vision narrowed to that single word. I closed my eyes against the weight of it. The dream was no longer guaranteed. It existed now only in my memory in the moment I had funded it. The plane would take off without me. They would board the villa without my laughter, my memory of James, my carefully labeled sunscreen bags. Silence enveloped my kitchen. The only sound was the soft hum of the refrigerator, as if it too were contemplating the gravity of my action. I stayed still, letting the silence settle around me like dust. I did not feel triumph, not relief, not regret, but a quiet resolve. I had reclaimed my power, said no to being taken for granted. After several minutes, I opened my email. The confirmation landed almost immediately. Your request to freeze all linked transactions has been completed. No further action is required. I read the email twice, savoring the straightforwardness of it. No apologies. No explanations. Just a confirmation of my authority. I tapped my finger against the table and felt an unexpected calm. The initial sting of loss faded, replaced by a clarity I hadn't known I needed. The dream I'd built was not about them. It was about honoring my own journey, my own memories, my own worth. If they chose to exclude me, that was their failing, not mine. I would find another way to carry James's legacy forward, maybe with new companions, new stories, new laughter. I reached for my chipped ceramic mug, now filled with chamomile, and took a careful sip. The warmth spread through me, dissolving the last of the tremors. I glanced at the duffel bag, leaning by the counter, the lavender candle peeking out from its side pocket, and realized something profound. The trip might not happen as planned, but its spirit lived on within me. The sacrifices, the hope, the dream, they belonged to me first. I set the mug down, wiped my lips with a fingertip, and closed the laptop lid with a decisive click. The house was still. I stood there for a moment, breathing the soft kitchen air, feeling an unfamiliar lightness. The dream I understood now was not merely a destination, but a testament to my perseverance. Standing in that dimly lit kitchen, I no longer felt erased. I felt rooted in the choices I had made, in the love I had poured into those dollar bills and coins. The money remained mine, available for new dreams that honored my value rather than denied it. With that thought, I turned off the under-cabinet light and let the darkness welcome me. In the quiet that followed, I decided that some dreams are meant to be paused, not abandoned, and that the power to restart them belongs entirely to me. I sat back at the kitchen table, the duffel bag still zipped tight behind me, and exhaled the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. The freeze account confirmation glowed on my laptop, but my gaze drifted instead to a blank page in my journal, the one I'd bought at the start of all this planning. I flipped past the scrawled dates and dollar amounts and landed on a fresh sheet. My pen hovered over the paper. I could have written Nathan's name or Tanya's and 1,000 reasons why they'd hurt me, but another thought came soft and clear. What about the women who'd already known this kind of ache? I wrote out a single word at the top, forgotten. Then I paused for a moment, pen poised above the paper, and thought about Carol from my church. Carol, whose laugh had once filled the fellowship hall, but who had stopped showing up after her son stopped calling when she was diagnosed with cancer. I remembered the day she sat beside me at the potluck table, her shoulders hunched, head bowed, as she cradled a styrofoam plate with a single meatball and a scoop of green beans. They said they're busy, she'd sighed, but they have time for everything else. I'd squeezed her hand then, but inside I'd felt that familiar hollowing of disappointment. I began writing. Carol, cherished once, abandoned now. Beneath her name, I scribbled a phone number I'd memorized when she'd asked for prayer requests. I wrote out the plan to call her tonight to tell her I saw her and wanted her to come away with me. Next came Louise, whose husband passed the previous fall. Louise, who still carried his 4x6 portrait in her purse, pressing it to her chest when she thought no one was looking. I remembered the tremble in her voice when she told me I can't bring myself to leave his photo at home anymore. So now I wrote Louise's widow with his memory in her hand and pressed the pen firmly to the next line. Then Frances came to mind, a silent force in the pew ahead of me on Sundays. She raised 3 grandchildren after her daughter abandoned them to chase a new life across the country. Frances, who would sit through the service, hands folded, tears glistening as she watched the choir lift their voices. But she missed 2 graduations since the teens started living with their father the next state over. I jotted Frances, spoiled by duty, forgotten by those she saved. My pen flew across the page, naming one after another. Beverly, whose brother with dementia lived in a facility she couldn't afford, so she slept on a cot beside his bed. Nora, who taught kindergarten until her knees gave out and never saw her own granddaughter's first steps. Lucille, the retired librarian who'd cataloged every volume in the town library, yet had never seen an ocean. Di, the neighbor who once gave me a ride when I twisted my ankle and refused any compensation. Under each name, I penned a brief truth, unseen, uncelebrated, uninvited. As I wrote, I felt a fierce warmth spreading through me as though each name lit a small flame in my heart. These women had carried burdens in silence, sacrificing sleep, comfort, dignity, just like I had, just to carve out scraps of love for their families. And each of them deserved something more than scraps. They deserved a week of belonging under a Hawaiian sun. My handwriting grew bolder as I wrote out the plan. First, I would call each of them one by one, ask if they could clear their calendars for the dates I'd already blocked off on the calendar. I pictured their voices over the phone, the gasps of surprise, the tears of joy, the disbelief that someone had thought to include them. I imagined them packing their own duffel bags, brushing soft dresses against their arms, feeling the lightness of possibility for perhaps the first time in years. I paused to stretch my hand, my memory drifting back to the sound of my own voice when I'd said, "Freeze account, a quiet authority that surprised even me." Now that same authority would guide me to shift this fund from fueling a trip for strangers to kindling dreams for forgotten sisters. I'd take the mortgage of that villa, each sunset view, each coconut lime fragrance, and share it with women who had never known such simple grace. The kitchen clock ticked past 4 in the afternoon as I finished my list. The page was a tapestry of resilience names tethered by their courage, their pain, and my promise to honor them. I tapped my pen against the paper and felt the solidity of my intention. No, I wasn't begging Nathan for a seat at the table. I was building my own table, one inclusive of those who had waited too long for recognition. I would send emails, make phone calls, and watch as each woman's astonishment turned into a blooming smile. I closed my journal, running a finger along the crease. I remembered how James used to say that hope was like planting seeds in sand. It required faith and stubborn persistence. I felt that persistence now, a grit tethered to purpose. I moved to the desk and opened a new spreadsheet, titling it simply Forgotten Women Trip. In the first column, I pasted each name. In the second, their contact information. In the third, a status column left blank, soon to be filled with confirmations and exclamations of gratitude. With nimble fingers, I drafted the first email to Carol. I wrote, "Dear Carol, I hope this message finds you feeling stronger each day. I have been thinking of you and want to share something special. I've arranged a week in Hawaii and would be honored if you would join me on this trip." I paused, reading the words aloud in the quiet kitchen. They sounded right warm, but clear, an invitation of respect rather than pity. I switched to my phone and dialed Carol's number, my heart fluttering like a bird anticipating flight. When she answered, her voice soft, hesitant, I introduced myself slowly as though speaking through water. "Carol, it's Marilyn. I know it's been hard lately, and I want you to know you've not been forgotten. I've arranged something I hope you'll consider." Her response was a fragile stutter of surprise and then tears. "Marilyn, I can hardly believe it." I smiled, though she couldn't see me. "Believe it, sister," I whispered. "We're going to watch the sunset together." I hung up and felt the tremor of excitement in my chest. One woman said yes. One name was no longer just ink on a page, it was a promise fulfilled. I returned to the spreadsheet, typing "confirmed" next to Carol's name. By the time dusk slipped across the sky, 2 more invitations had been extended. Louise, who choked back tears at the thought of her husband's photo perched by the sea, and Frances, whose elderly voice cracked with gratitude. Each confirmation felt like a small victory, a reclamation of dignity, not only for them, but for myself. I was no longer defined by exclusion. I was the architect of inclusion. Later, as I packed away the journal and closed my laptop, I let the quiet settle around me. The kitchen felt different now, no longer a place haunted by absence, but a command center for hope. I turned on the overhead light for the first time in days, letting its brightness wash away the shadows of shame. I breathed in the scent of lavender and chamomile lingering in the air, and I felt a smile curve my lips. I thought of the sands of Hawaii and the way the sun would kiss our faces there. I thought of laughter shared beneath swaying palm trees and candles flickering around James's photo. I thought of women who would arrive uncertain and weary and leave renewed and seen. And I thought of myself standing amidst it all, no longer a ghost of family gatherings, but a host of possibility. Sunlight slipped through the kitchen window just before dawn, painting the countertops in soft gold. I woke to the memory of my own action, the travel fund, frozen exactly at 8:15 a.m. Pacific, 2 hours before Nathan's group would check in at LAX. My phone lay silent beside the duffel bag. No beeps, no flashing notifications yet. I knew what awaited them on the other end of those cards. I rose quietly, padding across the cool tile to the kettle. As I filled it with water, I thought of those faces cued at the Hawaiian Airlines counter. Tanya's polite smile curdling into confusion. Nathan tracing charging cables on a phone screen, their children shifting in the line, wondering what could have gone wrong. It wasn't malice in my heart that held me back from a response. It was clarity. I owed them no explanation for reclaiming what I'd sacrificed to build. The kettle hissed, awake steam spiraling above my head. I retrieved my favorite chipped mug, the one James had gifted me on our 20th anniversary speckled blue, and spooned in loose peppermint leaves. Each swirl of that fragrant tea felt like a tether to my own truth, no longer a silent supporter, no longer an erased presence. I placed the mug on the countertop and watched the leaves unfurl green against the white porcelain. The morning light grew bolder as I carried my mug to the window seat. I cradled it in both hands, warmth seeping into my palms, and let my gaze drift over my meticulously tended garden. The rows of jasmine and lavender nodded in a slight breeze. I remembered the countless nights of sacrifice, skipping cables, selling furniture, tutoring English, each single act adding pennies to that fund. Now, watching the steam curl upward, I realized that my sacrifices had not been in vain. They had etched a path to my own awakening. My phone buzzed twice, damning reminders on the dark screen, missed calls from an unlisted number, a text notification blinking one new message. I didn't check. The message would likely be Nathan's frantic plea, Tanya's clipped apology, or perhaps a family group chat full of recriminations. None of that mattered. I had already answered with my silence and my clarity. I rose, walking over to the sink, and rinsed my mug. The water that ran over the porcelain carried away the last flecks of peppermint. I set the mug to dry and let my fingers linger on its cool glaze. It was a simple ritual, but in its simplicity lay my strength. I did not need to unleash a barrage of accusations. I did not need to articulate a single explanation. My choice was enough. Soft chirps of sparrows outside reminded me of the world beyond this house of memories. I stepped into my living room, the old photographs lining the mantel, catching the morning light. There was one of James and me laughing on our honeymoon, a snapshot of hope and youth. I touched the frame lightly and thought of how they had erased me from their story, but could never erase the chapters I held in my own hands. I opened my journal to the page where I had listed those forgotten women and smiled at the names Carol Louise, Frances, Beverly, Nora, Lucille, Di. They would be waking up soon, each breathing in the promise I had extended to them. I had already spoken to 3 of them last night, and the joy in their voices had washed away the ache I once felt. My own journey had become intertwined with theirs, each name a beacon of resilience. And that more than any eruption of revenge was the truest recompense. The house was silent now, save for the gentle hum of the refrigerator. I poured myself a fresh cup of water and carried it to my desk, settling into the leather chair I'd rescued from the yard sale a year ago. I powered on the laptop and opened the spreadsheet titled Forgotten Women Trip. Next to Carol Louise and Frances confirmed glowed in emerald text. The remaining names lay in pale gray, awaiting their own affirmations. I took a sip, tasting the cool clarity of water, and clicked on an empty cell next to Beverly's name. The cursor blinked, poised for my call, but I closed the spreadsheet instead. There would be time for invitations after the morning's quiet triumph. Outside, a car door slammed Mrs. Caldwell, leaving for her weekly market run. I waved through the window and watched her drive away. The parking rattle of groceries in her trunk echoed like a metronome to my morning. Life continued, each of us carrying stories of lost hope and transformation. I thought of how Nathan would discover my decision at the ticket counter. No drama, no confrontation, just the cold refusal of a chip reader. Perhaps they'd ask airport staff for assistance, the agent checking the reservation under my name and noting the pause on the account. Another "sorry ma'am, no personal note then." The click of shoes on marble as they retreated. That silent unraveling was my message. Love isn't owed, presents must be earned or freely given, not assumed. A memory flared Nathan at age 7, running to my arms after a scraped knee, tears streaming as he wailed, "Mom." I swept him up then with fierce protectiveness. Now, as an adult, he had given me an injury no soothing words could mend. In that moment, I found neither anger nor sorrow, but a quiet release. I had loved him through scraped knees and heartbreak alike, but love that demands entitlement is not love, it's possession. And possession, once unmasked, deserves no deference. I walked to the kitchen again for another cup of tea. This time a calming chamomile, and noticed the sunlight had warmed the floorboards near the window. I slipped off my slippers and felt the gentle heat press against my soles, grounding me in the reality of this morning. This was my world, my sanctuary, not a place to be bargained for. I filled my mug, inhaled the soft scent of blossoms and chamomile, and closed my eyes to let the tranquility wash over me. The house was quiet, but my mind was alive with possibility. Freezing the fund had been an act of self-preservation, not of vengeance. I had behaved less like a spiteful matriarch lashing out, and more like a woman reclaiming her own narrative. The next chapters of my story would be defined by love extended, not love withheld. I would host those forgotten women in a villa overlooking the Pacific, where laughter and tears could intermingle beneath palm fronds, where each sunset would burn away old wounds. At precisely 8:15 a.m., I imagined Nathan's frantic message arriving, "Mom, please call me." It would go unanswered. I would not interrupt my morning nor dignify his confusion with an explanation. If he wanted clarity, he could listen to the silence he had created. I set my mug down, the last drop of tea gone, and ran my hand over the table's smooth grain. In that tactile moment, I felt a permanence that no credit card lock could erase. I had learned over the past days that clarity, not revenge, is the most powerful statement. It does not scorch the earth behind you. It builds firm ground beneath you. The sun climbed higher, the sparrow's song grew louder, and I sensed the shift of a world moving forward. I gathered my journal, the sheet of names at its center, and tucked it into the duffel next to James's photo. My plans were etched in ink and pixels, ready for the next step. I opened the back door to let in a rush of warm air, a promise of possibilities yet to unfold beyond this kitchen threshold. In the silence that followed, I let myself feel at peace. The betrayal no longer clung like a shadow over me. It had dissolved in the clarity of choice. I owed them no explanation, no apology, no reconciliation on their terms. Instead, I held the power to extend hope to those who deserved it, to craft new memories under the Hawaiian sun, and to honor the legacy of a love that was free and abundant. I closed the door softly, leaving the quiet behind me, and stepped into the rest of my day, guided by a calm as solid as stone. I woke to the stillness of dawn slipping through the curtains, a pale wash of light across the kitchen floor. The house was immaculate. Every countertop gleamed, every floorboard polished. I'd scrubbed it to perfection the night before, not out of guilt or attempts to impress, but because a clear space feels like a clear mind. In the quiet, I could almost hear the echo of their footsteps at LAX, the sharp click of boarding passes against kiosk screens, and the sinking realization when the cards refused to work. It wasn't spite, it was clarity. I crossed the room and placed the kettle on the stove, measuring peppermint leaves into my favorite chipped mug. The scent rose in gentle ribbons as the water heated, a small pleasure that grounded me. I watched the steam swirl, and in its lazy dance, I saw the release of something heavy, old expectations, the burden of always saying yes, the endless pursuit of approval that had cost me more than I'd realized. Tea steeped. I carried the mug to the window seat overlooking our tiny garden where lavender and jasmine nodded in the morning breeze. I cradled the warm porcelain in my hands, exhaling slowly as I let the heat seep into my fingers. Outside, the world was waking. Birds skittered among the flower beds, and Mrs. Caldwell, 2 doors down, had already begun her morning walk, her steps steady and unhurried. In her rhythm, there was the promise of life unfolding on its own terms. Sipping my tea, I thought of what awaited them. Tanya, double-checking boarding times, scanning her phone madly for a message from me. Nathan's brow furrowed in confusion as the kiosk spit out messages like, "Transaction declined," and "Please contact your bank." I imagined his voice wobbling as he called me Mom. What happened? And I realized I owed him nothing but silence. Not revenge, but clarity. I owed them no explanation. I set the mug down and walked to the small desk where my laptop rested. A single notification blinked at me. Freeze account successful. The tab I'd opened to the bank's website showed the account as suspended, all outgoing transactions paused. I closed the browser and shut the laptop, the click of the lid echoing like final punctuation. Once locked, the fund belonged to me again, free to be used in a manner that honored purpose over entitlement. In the living room, I unrolled the map I'd drawn a week earlier, mapping routes to the nearby botanical garden, the best local food trucks, and the humble hula show in the town square. Before, those routes had been optional extras for a family trip that no longer included me. Now they were invitations to myself and to the 6 remarkable women who had accepted my call to gather. We would explore this island together on our own terms, each path a journey reclaimed. I walked into the bedroom and unfolded the linen folds of the 6 canvas tote bags I'd embroidered with their names. Each bag held not only clothes and toiletries, but also small tokens I'd chosen for them. A locally made soap nestled in seafoam green tissue for Carol, a grape-scented lip balm for Louise, a handcrafted journal for Frances, a set of shell earrings for Beverly, a packet of native wildflower seeds for Nora, and a handmade bookmark carved from koa wood for Lucille. These were not trinkets, but symbols of the value they carried within themselves, memories in the making. I placed the bags by the door, the morning light dancing on their bright embroidery. Their names: Carol Louise, Frances Beverly, Nora. Lucille seemed to pulse with possibility. I ran a finger over each stitch, feeling the weight of the decision to pivot from personal hurt to collective celebration. What I did here mattered more than any apology or explanation I might have offered Nathan and Tanya. This was where my energy belonged now, with those who needed affirmation, who deserved to feel seen. A soft buzz in my pocket reminded me of another connection, messages from the women themselves. I retrieved my phone and saw texts that arrived overnight. Carol's, "Thank you for my second chance." Louise's, "I can't wait." Frances's, "You're giving me hope." Each message was a small beacon confirming that clarity, turning away from resentment and toward purpose, bore more fruit than any act of revenge could. I sat back down at the window seat, opening my journal to the page where I had written the 6 names under the Forgotten Women. Earlier, I drafted itinerary sunrise yoga for Carol, a photography workshop for Louise, a grand tour of the botanical gardens for Frances, a cooking class with local women for Beverly, a sunset sail for Nora, and a storytelling circle for Lucille. Now those plans felt vivid, alive on the page. I used my pen to add one final note beneath each name, presence restored. I closed the journal and stood stretching my shoulders as though shaking off the last remnants of betrayal's weight. My throat felt clear, my mind uncluttered by what-ifs. I walked to the fireplace and picked up a small bundle of dried lavender from one of our ceremony nights. I carried it to the back door where I scattered a handful of the buds onto the flagstone path. Lavender for calm, I thought for peace of mind and openness of the heart. Just then, Mrs. Caldwell strolled by on her morning walk. She paused, glanced at the lavender, and offered me a wave. I stepped outside, waving back. "Beautiful morning," she said, her voice warm. I nodded. "It is," I replied. "Perfect for a new start." She smiled knowingly and continued on her way. I stood there for a moment, letting the sun warm my face and the breeze carry the lavender scent around me. Inside, I brewed another cup of tea, this time a bright hibiscus blend, and carried it to the dining room. The table had been set with 6 place settings, woven placemats, patterned dishes I'd selected for color and texture, cloth napkins folded beneath simple floral sprigs. I'd prepared their favorite breakfast treats, avocado tostadas for Carol, gluten-free banana pancakes for Louise, oatmeal with mango for Frances, scrambled eggs with herbs for Beverly, yogurt parfaits for Nora, and fresh fruit salad for Lucille. Each dish was an act of service made in gratitude rather than obligation. I sat down at the head of the table and watched the steam curling above my cup. This was the morning when we would gather not as beneficiaries of an expected welcome, but as honored guests invited by choice and intention. I pictured their arrival one by one, the quiet awe in their eyes as they took in the table set in their honor. When the front door opened, Carol was the first to step in. Her morning robe, loosely tied hair still tousled by sleep. She paused at the threshold and took in the scene, her eyes soft with wonder. "Marilyn," she whispered. I stood and offered her a hug. "Good morning, Carol. Please sit, breakfast is ready." Her smile was a sunrise of relief. Moments later, Louise, Frances, Beverly, Nora, and Lucille joined us, each enveloped in the soft glow of morning and the unspoken recognition that we were here for each other. They settled into their chairs, picking up forks and glasses as though grounding themselves in reality. I poured coffee, then passed the dishes around the table. Conversation flickered to life stories of sleepless nights, childhood memories, dreams for the future. Laughter rippled across the room, light and free, no longer shackled by the burden of forgotten worth. I listened heartful as each woman spoke of what this experience meant. Carol's eyes shone as she talked about reclaiming joy. Louise spoke of allowing herself to be cared for. Frances marveled at the idea that someone would celebrate her. Beverly glowed with gratitude at being first in someone's plans. Nora felt her spirit lift, finally recognized for her kindness. Lucille's voice trembled with wonder at seeing the ocean for the first time, not just fleetingly, but as a promise of more to come. As the morning light poured in, I realized that this breakfast was more than a meal. It was a ceremony of inclusion, a statement that here each of us mattered. No fine print, no hidden clauses, just an open invitation to belong. I had turned clarity into compassion, transforming an act once rooted in reclaiming funds into a vessel for authentic connection. Later, when the villa's cleaning staff arrived, they greeted us with warm aloha-s, and I felt the gentle uplift of community. Each interaction, sharing a smile with the housekeeper, chatting with the gardener, reminded me that kindness and recognition ripple outward beyond any single circle. In that bright, fragrant kitchen, I sat back and took a deep breath. Underneath the simple setup, 6 chairs, 6 place settings, 6 mugs of tea. I felt a profound sense of liberation. No longer tethered to the tiresome cycle of expectation and entitlement, I was free to craft experiences that honored presence and purpose. The lesson was clear: genuine love demands nothing less than wholehearted participation, and real power lies in the choice to lift others up. I sipped my hibiscus tea and let its tart sweetness send a final affirmation through me. I owed them no apology, no revenge, no explanation. In reclaiming clarity, I had created space for something far richer. And as the sun climbed higher, illuminating our circle of renewed spirits, I felt a deep gratitude for the journey that had led me here, from that fateful text to this morning's ceremony of authentic connection. I sat on the edge of my bed, the morning sun spilling through the curtains and warming the bouquet of lavender I'd tucked into a vase the day before. My phone lay face down on the quilt screen, black and silent, an intentional choice. I decided hours ago that I would not wake to the sharp ping of apologies or accusations. I wanted to taste this moment of clarity on my own terms. Downstairs, the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. The house felt empty, but not in the way I'd felt when the initial text arrived. Then emptiness was a hollow ache. Now it felt like open space, ready to be filled with new beginnings. I rose and padded barefoot to the kitchen, where I poured myself a glass of water and watched light dance along its surface. My fingers itched for the phone, for the familiar weight of its screen and the urge to check every notification. But I resisted. Instead, I sorted through a small stack of postcards from past trips, images of flaming sunsets, lush jungles, and white sandy beaches. My gaze settled on one of Waikiki's famous shoreline, a photograph taken decades ago when James and I had first tasted ocean salt on our honeymoon. I traced the outlines of our footprints with my fingertip, feeling their history beneath the glossy finish. Somewhere in the world, they were at an airport checking in. I could almost see Nathan's face, doubt and confusion mingling, as the kiosk spit out a blinking red alert card declined. I remembered the brief thrill of power I'd felt when I clicked freeze account, no dramatic announcements, just that quiet, irrevocable click. Watching their illusion shatter wasn't about vengeance. It was a confirmation of truth. They believed money equated to love, but money without trust is just paper. My phone buzzed once, then vibrated urgently against the counter. I recognized the number even before looking Nathan. I stared at the phone, breathing in the scent of lavender and chamomile lingering in the air. Let him think the phone was dead, or someone else's. I took a slow sip of water, tasting its clarity. Another buzz, a text preview, popped up on the lock screen. "Mom, please, call me now. This has to be a mistake." Beneath it, an Instagram notification glinted, "Tanya and family tagged you in a photo." I resisted the urge to unlock the screen. What she'd tagged me in, I wondered. A group selfie from the backseat of a shuttle, a Snapchat filter warping their faces into smiling emojis. I chose not to answer their frantic pleas. Instead, I reached for my journal and pen, settling back at the kitchen table. The page prompted me. How does this moment feel? I wrote the word free in large, careful letters, then underlined it. Beneath that, I scrawled a line, "I will not be purchased or placed on a pedestal just to be cast aside." The pen felt warm in my hand, the ink a vessel for my hard-won power. By mid-morning, I heard my neighbor's lawnmower roar to life next door. Mr. Alvarez always started early on weekends, coaxing his roses into bloom. I watched from the window as he trimmed the hedges, his silhouette blinking in and out of the green leaves. He tipped his wide straw hat at me, and I returned the gesture. In that simple acknowledgement, I felt community, and it was more nourishing than any family group chat. The resort email arrived at 9:12 a.m. Subject line reading, "Booking cancellation confirmed." I opened it and read, "Dear Miss Monroe, as per your instruction, all charges associated with booking AHA 2025 have been reversed. We hope to welcome you in the future." I closed the email, the words echoing in my mind, reversed, as though they referred not just to transactions, but to the narrative that had erased me. I offered them the trip. They seized it, but denied my presence. Now it was undone. I stood and poured myself a cup of herbal tea, inhaling its steam. The silence of my kitchen felt sacred. I sipped and closed my eyes, imagining the empty villa, its sliding glass doors swinging open to an uninhabited lanai chairs that would have gone unused, the gentle laughter that would never rise there under my name. My heart expanded with a bittersweet relief, not out of malice, but because my willingness to be excluded no longer held me captive. My phone buzzed again. I placed it face down on the table. Let them leave voicemails. Let them fill the group chat with messages like, "Where are you?" and "This isn't funny." Their panic could play out in endless circles. I would not step into that frantic dance. I had chosen silence, and silence was my loudest answer. As noon approached, I realized I was hungry, which surprised me. I prepared a simple lunch avocado on toast, sprinkled with sea salt, a nod to the ocean I would have looked out upon. I sat at the table, cutting the bread with precise, almost ceremonial care. I savored each bite slowly, appreciating the solidity of food in my hand, the taste of ripe avocado on fresh grain. The act of nourishment felt symbolic. I was feeding myself mind, body, spirit, rather than waiting for crumbs from a table that had long neglected me. I recalled the years I fed Nathan's growth, from pureed carrots to late-night study snacks, and realized those acts of love were not transactional. True love means nurturing, not ledger book giving. I washed my plate and cup, set them in the drainer, and watched as droplets collected on the porcelain. The rhythm of household routines felt affirming. Water running, plates drying light, shifting across the countertop. The hum of life continued as it always does beyond any personal drama. In the afternoon, I did something I hadn't in months. I painted. My old easel stood by the window in the living room, still holding a half-finished canvas of a Hawaiian shoreline. I'd started it last summer, dreaming of this very journey. Now I dipped my brush in turquoise paint and laid down broad strokes, building up layers of foam-like surf crashing onto sandy shore. My strokes were bold, each one an assertion of presence. I am here. I exist. I matter. Time melted away as I layered coral jade and sunrise gold across the canvas. The scent of acrylics mingled with lavender, crafting a heady perfume of creativity. In those moments, painting was an act of reclaiming my own narrative, color by color, wave by wave. The shoreline extended, infinitely welcoming any and all who sought its horizon. Near sunset, I stepped back from the easel and admired the work. It felt alive, the canvas humming with promise. I imagined those forgotten women standing here alongside me, each seeing themselves in the painting's light, each loading up their suitcases with their own dreams. When I finally dimmed the lights, the room was awash in soft twilight. I gathered my journal once more and added a note beneath, a list of forgotten women. Scrawled in bold letters, "We will claim sunsets together." I closed the journal and let sleep come gently, free from the need to replay texts or craft responses. That night, as I drifted off, I heard the distant roar of an airplane engine somewhere above. Nathan's group was heading for paradise they believed they owned. In my dreams, I stood on a warm beach, arms wide, greeting the women of my heart with open arms and no conditions. Laughter rose like a tide around me, and for the first time in a long while, I felt truly at home within my own story. I sat at the kitchen table late that night, the glow from the under-cabinet bulbs casting soft pools of light over my worn notebook. The page before me was blank, except for the words I wrote a few hours ago, the forgotten women. Each letter a heartbeat of purpose. Beneath, I jotted down 6 names: Carol, Louise, Frances, Beverly, Nora, and Lucille. 6 women who had given so much of themselves but rarely received acknowledgement, let alone a week in a beachfront villa with candles and laughter. My fingers hovered over the notebook, and I imagined their faces when they read the invitation. Carol's surprise, perhaps followed by tears. Louise's tentative smile as she clutched her husband's photograph. Frances's quiet gratitude that finally someone remembered her sacrifices. I could almost hear the muffled sobs of relief from Beverly, Nora, and Lucille as they realized they were not invisible. My chest tightened with anticipation. With my heart steadying, I reached for my laptop and opened the travel agency's booking portal. The villa was still available, its glass doors reflecting palm trees and a stretch of soft sand. I clicked Modify Booking and replaced the original guest list with these 6 names. Each entry required a formality of details, birth dates, passport numbers, dietary restrictions. I typed carefully, ensuring I honored each woman's needs. One required gluten-free meals, another needed a ground floor room with a 0-threshold shower. These were not mere checkboxes. They were acts of respect, each keystroke affirming their worth. Next, I reserved 6 matching straw hats, the same style I'd ordered for Tanya's family, but this time embroidered with each woman's name in delicate script: Carol's Sunshine, Louise's Light, Francis's Joy, and so on. I smiled, picturing us wearing those hats as we gathered by the villa's private pool, our names shimmering in gold thread. The process of booking felt oddly intimate. 6 lives. 6 stories, each woven into the tapestry of this trip. When I clicked Confirm, the page refreshed with a reservation number and a cascade of green check marks. A confirmation email pinged into my inbox, booking confirmed for Miss Monroe and 5 guests. I read it twice, savoring the proof that this was no longer a dream but a promise on its way to fulfillment. I closed the laptop and sat back, letting the satisfaction settle in my bones like warm honey. With the funds I'd reclaimed, I'd not only disrupted a cycle of entitlement, but redirected generosity toward those who truly needed it. I took out the notebook again and in crisp ink wrote the itinerary, arrival dates, housekeeper's contact, local flower crown workshops, morning yoga on the lanai, evening hula lessons. Each line was a thread connecting their realities to this moment of recognition. That night, I couldn't sleep, not out of anxiety, but out of a buzz of excitement. I imagined each of them receiving a handwritten card, the envelope slipping through their mail slots. Dear Carol, pack a swimsuit and your brightest smile. We leave for Hawaii on May 12th. Love, Marilyn. I pictured them pressing their hands to their cheeks, disbelieving, then grinning in tearful astonishment. Morning arrived with a crisp promise. I brewed peppermint tea and munched on a toasted bagel, replaying the plan in my mind's eye. The house was still quiet, but inside me there was a gentle hum of purpose. I dressed in jeans and a simple white blouse, the fabric soft against my skin. I grabbed my keys and slipped into the car, driving the 2 blocks to the post office. At the counter, I handed the clerk 6 brightly colored envelopes. Special delivery for 6 very special women, I said, forcing a grin that felt too big for my face. She raised an eyebrow, but rang up postage without comment. As I slid each envelope into the outgoing bin, I felt each name leap from ink to reality, an invitation that would ripple across their lives like the first gentle lap of waves on sand. Back home, I organized the guest list on my bulletin board, pinning index cards under photos of Hawaiian beaches and local flower lei vendors. Carol's card had a blue border, Louise's lavender, Francis's green, and so on, each color chosen to echo the woman's spirit. Around the board, I wove photos of plumeria and hibiscus, crafting a mood board that vibrated with possibility. Over the next few days, the responses came in. First, a text from Carol, Marilyn. What have you done? I needed this more than I knew. Thank you. Then an email from Louise. My hands are shaking. I've never left the state. I feel like a child who's just been hugged after years alone. Francis called in the afternoon. I'll never forget this, and neither will my grandchildren. With each reply, the project took on a heartbeat of its own. I was not just planning a trip. I was orchestrating an awakening for 6 women whose lives had been overshadowed for far too long. I arranged a video call with all 6 a week before departure. On screen, 6 faces beamed back at me, some shy, some exuberant. We exchanged introductions and tentative laughs as though meeting for the first time at a writer's retreat. Carol wiped away tears when I recounted the story of how I'd noticed her absence from church events. Louise cradled her husband's portrait just off-screen. Beverly adjusted her camera to show the dimly lit room where she cared for her brother. Frances smiled softly, her eyes sparkling. Nora and Lucille sat side by side, one in her kitchen, the other in her living room, both leaning forward as though to catch every word. We spent an hour sharing stories and hopes, discussing sunblock preferences and dietary quirks, whether anyone wanted an early morning hike or a lazy afternoon by the pool. The call felt like an embrace, a collective exhale of relief and wonder. I watched them transform from solitary figures behind screens into companions bonded by anticipation. After the call, I updated the spreadsheet and printed a final itinerary, stapling it to a folder labeled Island Adventure. I added PDFs of plane tickets and villa rules, then slipped the folder into my office drawer, ready to hand off once we gathered at the airport. I found a shelf for the straw hats and laid out 6 matching tote bags, each emblazoned with a floral pattern, and our trip dates. That evening, I sat on the porch with a glass of iced tea, watching the sky turn rose and gold. I thought of the original trip, the one that Nathan and Tanya boarded without me, and felt a flicker of gratitude for its collapse. Their exclusion had redirected my energy towards something truly meaningful. The funds were still intact, but now they fueled connection, uplift, and shared joy, not entitlement and erasure. I closed my eyes and listened to the wind rustle through the jasmine vines. So many times I had held my breath, waiting for approval, waiting to be included. Now I exhaled, fully releasing the weight of those years. Inclusion was not something I demanded. It was something I created. I had built a vessel not for a singular family event, but for a gathering of souls who deserved to be seen and celebrated. As dusk deepened into night, lanterns flickered to life along my walkway. I took my notebook from the table, and in the margin of the Forgotten Women page, I penned one final note. This is only the beginning. I smiled at the words, an affirmation that the trip was not the culmination, but the first step in a new direction. The next morning, I would finalize travel itineraries and confirm rental cars. Soon, I would stand on that beach with 6 remarkable women at my side, each present in a way that pedigree could never guarantee. For now, under the hush of the night sky, I savored the promise of dawn and the winding path ahead, a path lit by the glow of restored trust and the laughter of women no longer forgotten. The morning I flew out, I woke before sunrise, too excited to sleep. I packed the duffel bag one more time, slipping James's framed photograph into a corner lined with bubble wrap and soft tissue paper, his mischievous grin forever preserved in warm walnut. I tucked in 7 scented candles: lavender for calm plumeria, for nostalgia, coconut vanilla for comfort, and 4 more fragrances that would carry our laughter into every corner of the villa. I zipped the bag shut and stepped back, scanning the living room where the empty photo frame on the mantel now stood. As a reminder, this was no longer my trip alone, but an invitation extended to 6 kindred spirits. At the airport, my heart fluttered in sync with the roar of jet engines. I wore one of those matching straw hats I'd ordered, embroidered in gold thread with my name, Marilyn's Light, and clutched a canvas tote embroidered with the Forgotten Women in bold blue letters. Passengers glanced curiously as I danced in place, reciting the itinerary in my mind: rendezvous at LAX. 6 tickets in my hand. 6 lives about to intertwine for 7 days under the Hawaiian sun. Boarding was a quiet thrill. I settled into my window seat, the Pacific sky a sliver of pink at dawn. I fingered the worn grain of the notebook in my lap, where I'd mapped out each day morning yoga on the lanai for Carol, who needed gentle movement for her joints. A private lei-making class I'd booked for Louise, whose hands trembled less now that she had a reason to believe in beauty again. An evening beachfront bonfire for Frances, who deserved laughter more than a single Sunday hymn. Each plan felt like a lifeline, a promise I couldn't wait to fulfill. The flight stretched before me in long, silent hours. I closed my eyes and pictured the villa's whitewashed walls, its broad sliding doors opening onto that private porch. I heard the whisper of palm fronds and the murmur of ocean waves. My mind drifted to Tanya's family, the ones who thought love meant entitlement. I smiled, recalling their matching hats and inflated serenity. I did not pity them. I felt only gratitude that their loss was my gain, that their illusion of inclusion had given me this chance to create genuine belonging. When the plane touched down at Daniel K. Inouye International Airport, I felt the warm tropical air seep in through the cabin vents. I gathered my things and stepped onto the jet bridge, a soft breeze carrying a hint of salt and gardenia. My heart raced with anticipation, knowing I would meet my chosen family at baggage claim. I watched travelers collect their bags, but each time I expected to see one of 6 faces. They weren't there yet. I smiled at the freedom of arriving alone first this moment to ground myself before the spirited reunion. I retrieved our 2 large suitcases from the carousel, one with the candles, one with linens, the other a smaller carry-on with my clothes, and headed to the rental counter. The agent recognized my reservation under Monroe, handed me 6 key cards, and wished me aloha. I tucked the cards into my wallet and followed the map to the villa's seaside community, the car's tires crunching on volcanic gravel as I wound up tree-lined hills. Finally, I turned into the driveway of our home for the next week. The villa rose before me, soft stucco walls crowned by a terracotta roof, a wide lanai that curved gently toward the Pacific Adirondack chairs, beckoning under a bamboo pergola. The turquoise water stretched beyond, merging with a powder blue sky. I parked, stepped out, and inhaled deeply the scent of salt and plumeria and possibility. I unlocked the front door with a flourish, stepping into cool tiled floors. A gentle sea breeze followed me, ruffling the linen drapes. I set down the suitcases and opened the big picture window to let in more air. Inside, the living room's white slip-covered sofa faced floor-to-ceiling glass walls. A low wooden coffee table sat center stage, ready to bear our candles and photo. I imagined us gathered here, telling stories in the soft glow of dusk. My first task was sacred placing James's photograph center stage. I carried it carefully, unwrapped the bubble wrap, and slid the walnut frame onto the table, its polished wood gleaming. I arranged the 7 candles around it, 3 on each side, 1 in front, so that at nightfall we'd create our own circle of light. I tested 1 wick with a match from my bag, watching the flame flare, then steady, sending a thread of smoke swirling upward. It was perfect. I wandered through the rest of the villa, noting each detail. I'd requested the firm but plush beds, the walk-in shower at ground level, the wicker chairs arranged around a fire pit on the back deck. I smiled at the kitchenette stocked with local coffee and plumeria honey. On a corner shelf, someone had left a welcome note and a small lei of shell flowers. I draped it around my neck, closing my eyes to feel the weight of its petals, as though carrying the welcome of the land itself. As the afternoon sun climbed high, I settled onto one of the Adirondack chairs on the porch, notebook in hand, awaiting their arrival. The gentle hum of the air conditioning mingled with the distant crash of waves. I checked my watch, 2 hours until Carol's flight, touched down 90 minutes until Louise's. I sipped filtered water from a glass pitcher and let the anticipation settle in my bones, a humming electricity that made me feel alive, connected, ready. Then I heard the crunch of tires. I stood and brushed lint from my blouse. At the gate of the villa, Carol stepped out of a white SUV, gingerly clutching a small suitcase. Her silver hair shone in the sunlight, and as she looked up, her eyes widened. I waved and held out the lei, and she crossed the grass in tentative steps, as though walking into a dream. "Marilyn?" she asked, voice trembling with disbelief. "Oh my, this is for me?" I nodded, tears welling in my own eyes, and slipped the lei around her neck. Her shoulders straightened as though a weight had lifted. One by one, the others arrived. Louise emerged, clutching her husband's portrait to her chest. Frances hobbled down our brick path on a cane, her face alight with wonder. Beverly stepped out with a shy smile that blossomed into laughter. Nora and Lucille arrived arm in arm, marveling at the view. Each encounter felt like the culmination of years of waiting. The women embraced with genuine astonishment, their eyes glistening with the promise of belonging. I ushered them inside, offering chilled Mai Tai mocktails. I'd prepared a blend of pineapple juice, coconut water, and a sprig of mint. We toasted to new beginnings, our glasses clinking beneath James's photo. The first sip drew a collective gasp of delight. The laughter that rose between us felt unencumbered, pure, as though 12 lonely hearts had finally found each other. We spent the late afternoon exploring our temporary home, discovering a hammock tucked in a secluded corner, experimenting with the shower's rainhead spray, opening sliding doors to let in the sea breeze. Each room held a new surprise, a testament to the care I'd taken in planning. And all the while, I watched their faces light up, their shoulders unfurl, their voices rise in unrestrained conversation. Presence mattered here more than pedigree. We were a mosaic of lives stitched together by shared recognition. As evening fell, I guided them back to the porch. I handed out matches, and one by one, we lit the scented candles around James's portrait. In the flickering glow, his smile seemed to come alive, his laugh echoing softly through the twilight. We formed a loose circle, hands cupped around mugs of hot herbal tea, and each woman spoke a word that described what she needed in that moment. Healing, hope, belonging, renewal, courage, peace. And I spoke mine, gratitude. We sat there for a long time, the waves whispering below the sky, deepening to indigo. Fireflies began their luminous dance among the palms, adding their own flickers of wonder. In that circle of light with 6 remarkable women at my side, I felt an ember of something powerful stir a rekindling of purpose that no shadow of exclusion could ever extinguish. The villa, once a setting for a dream denied, now brimmed with vibrant life. We were not just 6 guests paid for by a travel fund. We were a chosen family, united by recognition and respect. In the warm hush of that Hawaiian evening, I knew I had gathered my true kin souls who would carry this memory forward, who would remind me and each other that presence always matters more than pedigree. The first night after dinner's clatter was swept away and the tropical breeze settled into a hushed lullaby. I guided the women onto the villa's back patio, where delicate string lights arched overhead like a celestial canopy. The Pacific beyond glowed silver in the moonlight, and the air was rich with the scent of plumeria. James's photograph stood at the heart of our circle, framed by 7 flickering candles that pulsed with gentle warmth. We formed a semicircle on the planked deck, each woman holding a long taper candle. I watched their faces, lines of labor and laughter eyes shifting between curiosity and trepidation. I offered them each a match and asked softly, "Speak your truth tonight." The words hung in the perfumed air. No podium, no audience beyond our small gathering, just 7 hearts bared under the swaying lights. Carol, whose laughter once rang through our church hall but had quieted after her son's silence, held her candle with trembling hands. She inhaled, then spoke, voice low but resolute. "I miss being needed," she said, tears glittering on her lashes. "I gave so much to others, I forgot I needed someone in return." She touched her match to the taper's wick, and as the flame climbed her shoulders, straightened as if she'd reclaimed a part of herself. Louise went next, clutching her husband's portrait to her chest. "I have carried him here," she said, voice thick with memory. "I was his nurse, his companion, and then alone." She paused, eyes glistening, then spoke again. "Tonight, I light this candle for the part of me that deserves care too." Her taper caught flame, the glow reflecting in the glass of the frame, as though igniting both her own spirit and his memory. When Frances, the grandmother, who'd raised her grandchildren, yet missed their milestones, took her turn, her voice quavered. "I helped them cross every stage," she said, "but I never crossed one for myself." She lowered her gaze, then looked up as she lit her candle. "I am worthy of celebration, not just service." The small flame trembled but then steadied, as if emboldened by her words. Beverly, who slept on a cot beside her brother's hospital bed, stepped forward next. Her pale face held a quiet dignity. "I learned to put others first," she admitted, "but I forgot how to be first in my own life." She struck her match, lit the taper, and held it aloft. "Tonight I choose myself," she declared. The light danced in her eyes, illuminating a hope she'd long kept hidden. Nora, whose knees had given out, yet she cheered on every child she taught, spoke with a gentle strength that surprised us all. "I spent years kneeling to help tiny hands," she said. "But I never looked into my own reflection and said, 'I'm enough.'" She bent forward slightly to light her candle and straightened as though lifting an invisible weight from her chest. Lucille, the retired librarian who catalogued every volume yet never saw the ocean, smiled shyly before her turn. "I remember every story," she said, "but I have yet to write my own chapter of joy." She lit her candle slowly, eyes steady. "This light is the beginning of my story." Finally, all those flames flickered together, encircling James's portrait in a warm embrace. I waited until the quiet settled again, then lifted my own taper. My voice shook, but the words were clear. "I lit my life for love, and sometimes love is taken for granted. Tonight I reignite my own flame and welcome yours." I placed my candle next to theirs, the circle complete. We sat then, mugs of mint tea warming our hands, and the tender hush between us felt like a sacred covenant. In that shared silence, I heard the oceans whisper and felt the pulse of gratitude rising from each woman's heart. Conversation bloomed as gently as the night flowers, outside soft laughter, intermittent sobs, the rustle of dresses in the breeze. Carol spoke of the garden she once tended with her son's help and how she would teach me to prune roses the next morning. Louise described how she would hang her husband's photo in her own home upon return, no longer hidden in a drawer. Frances promised to attend her grandchildren's next recital in person, not from halfway across the state. Beverly chuckled as she imagined sleeping in a real bed again, rather than a bedside cot. Nora confessed her plan to register for a pottery class she'd always admired. And Lucille vowed to book a sunset sail, her first voyage beyond library walls. Their words wove together into a tapestry of transformation, each thread a testament to resilience and renewal. I watched them unfold, softer, braver, more fully alive, in effect, more precious than any tropical vista. As I listened, my own tears warmed my cheeks, a quiet testament to the love that binds us beyond bloodlines. Night after night, we returned to that circle. We learned each other's laughter and lament. We shared meals of fresh fish and tropical fruit garnished with sprigs of mint from the villa's herb garden. We wandered along the shore at dawn footprints side by side in the sand. We clapped hands for sunrise hula lessons, stumbling and giggling at our own awkward grace. We dipped our toes in the water under moonlight, letting the tide draw out old sorrows. On the third evening, I watched Frances help Lucille adjust her candle as the wind rose. The older women's hands trembled in unison, yet in their shared vulnerability lay a profound courage. They struck matches together, their faces lit by a ring of flames, and for a moment they looked like goddesses carved in candlelight, timeless, powerful, and free. One night, when a sudden rain shower sent us scurrying indoors, we gathered around the kitchen island. I handed out mugs of hot ginger tea and listened as Carol suggested we start an annual retreat. "No men allowed," she joked, and Louise agreed, her eyes bright with mischief. Even Beverly, usually reserved, announced she would design invitations for next year, complete with a map drawn in watercolor. Our laughter bounced off the tile walls, a jubilant chorus that no longer feared the darkness. By the final night, each woman carried a small flicker of flame within her, a rekindled light she had stoked with her own words. We moved the candles to the fire pit outside, lighting an actual bonfire this time. I watched them toss their spent wicks into the flames, each act a symbol of release. The fire roared as we circled around arms-linked hearts laid bare. I asked each woman to speak one last truth, and they did so with fierce joy. Carol said, "I am no longer invisible." Louise said, "My love outlives absence." Frances said, "I am present in every moment." Beverly said, "I am worthy of wonder." Nora said, "I am enough just as I am." Lucille said, "I am the author of my own chapter." Then it was my turn. I am the architect of my own legacy, and I will continue building with love. Our voices rose together, a chant of affirmation carried into the salty air. The night sky stretched above, stars blinking like knowing eyes. In that circle of unguarded hearts, I felt seen for the first time in years. The glow of the fire mirrored in each woman's eyes told me that genuine love demands nothing less than full presence. No asterisks, no fine print. As the embers died down and the flames receded, we lingered in the soft afterglow. Someone hummed an old hymn, and we joined in our voices, weaving into the night. It wasn't a spectacle for outsiders. No captions, no hashtags, just a private ceremony of recognition, a testament to the power of acknowledgement. I walked each woman back to her suite, the night air cool against my skin, and watched as they disappeared behind screen doors. I stood alone by the fire pit, the last sparks fading into darkness, and traced my fingertips across the smooth stone rim. In the quiet that followed, I realized that this trip had given me and these women something beyond any itinerary or villa, a truth spoken aloud, a wound acknowledged, a heart validated. I closed my eyes and breathed in the nocturnal chorus, the ocean's hum, the rustle of palms, the distant hoot of an owl, and felt my own spirit settle into a profound peace. In recognizing their hidden sorrows, I had recognized my own. And in lifting them into the light, I had cast aside the shadows that once dimmed my world. That night, as I slipped into bed with the lavender candle's last glow fading in the hallway, I knew I was not the same woman who had arrived. I was part of something larger, a circle of genuine love, demanding nothing less than wholehearted presence. And in that knowledge, I found my own liberation. I woke before sunrise on our final day in Hawaii, the sky painted in pastel ribbons of pink and lavender. The gentle roll of waves greeted me as I slipped quietly out of the villa, leaving straw hats and tote bags behind. I walked barefoot across the warm sand, the grains soft beneath my feet, and let the water wash over my ankles. Each pulse of the tide whispered, "Let it go." I closed my eyes and exhaled the last traces of doubt that had clung to me for years. The Pacific stretched to the horizon, an endless blue promise. I thought of the text that had shattered my dream, the cold judgment that you've done your part by paying. I felt no anger now, only a soft release, the kind that comes when you finally stop carrying weights that were never meant for your shoulders. I forgave their forgetfulness, not for their sake, but to free myself from the quiet ache of expectation. Behind me, the villa lay peaceful, its whitewashed walls warmed by the early sun. I pictured our circle of candles now melted into pools of wax around James's photograph, and remembered the women who had shared their truths under strung lights, Carol finding her own worth again, Louise embracing care for herself, Frances celebrating milestones in her own life, Beverly learning she deserved wonder, Nora granting herself enough, Lucille authoring her own chapter. Each one had stepped into the light of recognition, and I had stepped with them. The tide pulled gently as though coaxing me to release the final fragments of pain. My daughter-in-law's eye rolled the photos that left me out the assumption that love could be bought. I opened my arms as the water swirled around me, carried away by the ebb and flow. I whispered to the ocean, I let it go, and felt a calm confidence settle in my chest. I walked back up the beach to the path that led to the villa's back gate, brushing damp sand from my legs. I passed Frances's suite. Her window was open, and I could hear her humming softly words of a local lullaby drifting on the breeze. Further along, I glanced into Louise's doorway. Her chair was drawn close to the window, and she sat reading a letter by candlelight, her expression peaceful. Somewhere inside, tears had fallen, but now there was only quiet contentment. In the kitchen, I found Carol at the counter slicing fresh mango for breakfast. "Good morning," I said, and she turned with a radiant smile. "Morning," she replied. "I've never felt this seen." She placed the fruit on a woven tray, and together we carried it to the dining table, where Nora and Lucille were already pouring coffee. Beverly joined us with a fresh vase of plumeria she'd gathered from the garden. The simple pleasure of shared morning ritual felt like a sacred rite. We ate in companionable silence, watching the sun climb higher. I noticed how each woman held herself differently, now shoulders back, eyes bright, voices unguarded. The transformation that began with one text had blossomed into a mosaic of restored dignity. The meal ended, and we lingered over mugs of strong local brew, savoring the way every sip reminded us of our own resilience. After breakfast, I asked if anyone wanted one last walk along the shore. We gathered our things, sunglasses, sun hats, canvas, tote bags, and stepped outside. The villa's caretaker waved as we passed, and I felt a swell of gratitude for every person who had tended to our needs. We formed a line as we walked barefoot in the sand, a single file of renewed possibility. As we reached the water's edge, the group paused. I turned to face the women who had become my chosen family, 6 faces framed by early morning light, each reflecting her own story of hardship and hope. I spoke softly, not as their sponsor, but as their sister. Look how far we've come. We planted seeds of truth here, and they grew into our shared light. They nodded, some smiling, others holding back tears. We watched the waves together, united by the promise of renewal. Then I said, I want to do something on behalf of all of us. I reached into my tote and pulled out a small stack of blank postcards I'd brought, each stamped with an image of our villa and the Hawaiian sunset. I want you to write one word on these cards, one word that sums up what this week means to you. Pens passed around, and each woman held a card Carol wrote worth. Louise penned healing. Frances inscribed celebration. Beverly chose wonder. Nora wrote enough, and Lucille's card read legacy. I wrote liberation on mine and held up the stack so everyone could see. We placed our cards in the sand, letting the tide approach until the water kissed the words, washing over the edges without erasing them entirely. The act felt symbolic, our truths grounded and yet flowing outward into the world. We watched as the waves retreated, leaving the cards adrift but unbroken. It was a ceremony of recognition, a testament that we would carry these words with us, no matter where we went. When the tide ebbed, we retrieved the cards, folding them gently and slipping them back into our totes. I watched each woman cradle her word close, as precious as a seashell pressed to the ear. We walked back in silence, the weight of our shared ceremony binding us in quiet solidarity. Later, as we packed our suitcases, laughter filtered through the villa, a sound that had once been muted by exclusion and shame. Now each article of clothing placed in a bag was accompanied by a promise: I am seen, I am worthy, I am enough. The transformation was not a return to who we'd been, but an arrival at who we chose to be. By the time our group shuttle arrived, the morning sun blazed high in the sky. I stood at the gate, suitcase in hand, and watched each woman step forward, radiant and resolute. They hugged me tightly, whispering thanks and promises to carry this camaraderie home. When their shuttle pulled away, winding down the palm tree-lined drive, I felt a tug of bittersweet joy. I turned back toward the villa, the place that had hosted our rebirth. I stood for a long moment on the porch, the wind stirring the strings of lights overhead. The candles around James's photograph had burned down to stubs, but their glow lingered in my heart. I breathed in the scent of salt and floral breeze, savoring the freedom that comes when you reclaim your story. I walked inside and gathered the straw hats and canvas bags. I placed them in the living room alongside my own duffel and the memory of shared smiles. Each item would return home with me, not as relics of a trip that tore me away, but as emblems of a journey toward authentic connection. At the front door, I paused to look back at the villa's interior, bright, airy, alive with echoes of laughter. I whispered a quiet blessing over the space made continue to welcome those who need to be seen. Then I stepped out, closing the door gently, and locked it behind me. I slid the key into an envelope addressed to the caretaker. Thank you for holding our sanctuary. The drive to the airport was a meditation in motion, palms and placers of lava rock passing by in a steady blur, the sun warming my skin through the open car window, the radio playing soft island melodies. I held my notebook in my lap, running my thumb over the cover where The Forgotten Women was written in confident letters. In the margins of the final page, I'd added one more note. Let the light we carry shine beyond these shores. When I arrived at the airport, the lines were bustling with travelers chasing vacation dreams, wheeling bags, and scanning screens. I walked through the throng calmly, my step measured, my mind at ease. I had no need to justify my journey or defend my choices. My heart was light, unburdened by expectations fueled by genuine connection and the knowledge that I had sparked something lasting. At the check-in kiosk, I entered the code for my homeward flight, and my bag dropped below the conveyor belt. The agent offered me a warm smile and a small lei of orchids. Aloha, she said. I placed it over my head and felt its petals rest against my collarbone, a final gift of inclusion in this place of rebirth. As I waited at my gate, I watched the ocean appear through the terminal windows, still shimmering, still alive with possibility. I closed my eyes and whispered a promise to myself and to the world. I will continue to fund dreams where presence matters more than pedigree. I will seek out forgotten souls and light their paths. I will reclaim power with compassion, and I will stand at water's edge, always ready to let it go. When the boarding call came, I rose and stepped forward, carrying with me the legacy of 6 women who reminded me what genuine love demands. As I passed through the gate, I breathed in deeply, ready for whatever lay beyond. In that breath, I carried the ocean's promise and the firelight of our shared ceremonies, a living testament that when a grandma reclaims her power, she lights the way for all forgotten souls.